Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And this is video number 5 in response to a series of 4 articles that were written by Dr. Kenneth Gentry. Now, Dr. Gentry's 4 articles were written as an attack on my brand new book, Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? And I wrote this book for a number of reasons. Pardon me. But you see, when we come to the Olivet Discourse and Jesus' prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, Matthew 23:37, Matthew 24, verse 2, the consensus of scholarship, the consensus of church history. As Mr. Gentry points out time and time again, of how Preston is in violation of the consensus of church history and the great number of scholars. Okay, so I admit that. I admit that I reject church history and its interpretation of Matthew 24:3. I admit, freely so, that I reject the consensus of scholarship. When scholarship says Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, the apostles were so shocked that they confusedly conflated that prediction and that event with the end of time, the end of the Christian age. So, when Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple and the city, the apostles go, oh my goodness gracious, he's talking about the end of time. He's talking about his coming at the end of the Christian age, when he, as a 5'5" Jewish man, rides on a literal cumulus cloud out of heaven. That's what he's talking about. And of course, that great consensus, that great, quote, cloud of witnesses, excuse the pun, of scholars tell us, you see, the apostles were just confused. They were horribly ignorant. Now, let me tell you, as I have suggested before, and as I've suggested in my entire series on the Olivet Discourse, if the apostles were not confused to conflate the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple with the Lord's coming in the end of the age, there is no futurist eschatology. If they were not wrong to join the coming of the Lord, the end of the age, with the coming destruction of the temple, then the Olivet Discourse is absolutely not divided. And that means that Mr. Kenneth Gentry's upcoming book, upcoming at the time I make this video, obviously, in which he is seeking to prove that the apostles were confused, that the apostles were wrong, his book is wrong before it ever hits the press. Now, mind you, I have challenged Mr. Gentry many times to meet me in formal public debate to discuss eschatology. He refuses to do it. When he wrote his attack, the 4 articles on my book, I sent him an email challenging him, inviting him once again. Let's have a formal public debate. Let's do it on YouTube. Let's do it, let's do a Zoom. Let's just do a discussion and discuss these issues. Well, no, he's too busy. And so what he will do, he will continue to write his book. He's already given us information that says in his upcoming book, he's just going to devastate me. He's going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that my book and my other book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, is just wrong. Now, he could take the time to write 4 articles attacking my book and attacking me, but he doesn't have the time to share that research with us in continuing articles. Kind of revealing, don't you think? But this question of whether or not the apostles were confused lies at the very foundation of all futurist eschatologies. Does not matter if it's amillennial, postmillennial, or premillennial. They all say the apostles were confused. Now, I've only got a couple of things that I want to cover this morning. In my next video, video number 6, I'm going to be examining Mr. Gentry's hermeneutic. Mr. Gentry's hermeneutic that he bases all 4 of his articles on, that he bases his entire attack of Preston on, his entire hermeneutic upon which he bases his attack of my book is this. Well, in Matthew chapter 24, verse 2, Jesus was speaking of the temple. Do you not see all of these things? That includes, that's the temple proper and all the temple buildings, which were a bunch of them. The time is coming in which not one stone shall be left standing on top of another. And the apostles said, when shall these things, obviously referring to the destruction of the temple and the temple complex. Now, Mr. Gentry says, Jesus was not focused on and was not discussing the destruction of Jerusalem. He was only focused on and predicting the destruction of the temple. And when the apostles asked, tell us when shall these things be, they're not thinking about the invasion of the land of Israel. They're not asking about the fate of the people of Israel and Judah and Jerusalem. And they're not concerned with, they're not focused on, they're not concerned with the destruction of Jerusalem. Over and over and over in his articles, Mr. Gentry says, and this is a preview of what's coming, Mr. Gentry says, Jesus was predicting the destruction of the temple, not the city. The apostles were asking about the fate of the temple, not the city. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is absolutely one of the most disingenuous, egregiously false hermeneutics that you will ever encounter. And I will demonstrate that, oh, by the way, from Mr. Gentry's own writings, where when he's arguing against dispensationalists, he rejects that kind of a hermeneutic. When he's not arguing against preterism, Mr. Gentry knows that you cannot make such arguments. And again, I'm going to document this from Mr. Gentry's own writings. I'm going to present to you and for you how Mr. Gentry, when not arguing against preterism, poses the question and the issue of whether or not Jesus was concerned with the fate of the temple only, or whether he was concerned with the temple and the city, and he was. So, when not arguing against preterism, the truth of preterism, Mr. Gentry knows Jesus was predicting more than the destruction of the temple. When not arguing against preterists, Mr. Gentry knows, teaches, and has affirmed, you can't say and you can't claim, it's a false hermeneutic to say the apostles were only concerned about the fate of the temple, not the city. It's a very revealing fact. And it's easy to document how Mr. Gentry refutes his own hermeneutic that he sets forth in his 4 articles attacking my book. Now, by the way, you need to go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. While I'm doing these reviews, I'm keeping the price of the book at $15.95 plus postage. After the reviews are done, after my videos are done, the price will resort back to $17.95 plus shipping, so it saves a couple of bucks. Now then, I want to point out something that is incredibly disingenuous about Mr. Gentry's attack of my book, and how his attack falsifies his own positions, or at least calls them into question. Now, mind you, Mr. Gentry is claiming that in Matthew 24, 4 through chapter 25, Jesus is talking about two things. Number one, the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. More on that momentarily, so hang on. Secondly, his literal, visible, bodily, fleshly, if you please, coming at the end of human history, at the end of the current Christian age. Now, here's something that you really have to focus on. You really have to catch the power of this. Now, remember that according to Gentry, the apostles were asking about, in response to Jesus' prediction of the coming destruction of the temple and the city, and digression, Matthew 23:37. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, that's the city, right? Thou that stonest the prophets, kills those who are sent unto thee. How often I would have gathered together your children, as a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. Is Jesus pronouncing judgment on both the city and the temple? Yes. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Gentry acknowledges that. Okay, so according to Mr. Gentry, Matthew chapter 24, 2 and 3 are about the temple only, which he admits was in AD 70. But here is, and by the way, I've got a plethora of quotes from Mr. Gentry's writings in which he acknowledges and admits that Matthew 24, 2 and 3 were about the city and the temple. Yeah, I'll share those with you later. So, once again, Matthew chapter 24, 4 to 34, according to Mr. Gentry, is about the events leading up to consummating in AD 70. So here's what that means. According to Mr. Gentry, Matthew 24, 4 to 34 is about the coming of the Lord. Mr. Gentry admits, teaches, and affirms that the coming of the Lord in Matthew 24, 30 and 31 was in AD 70. Mr. Gentry agrees, admits, and affirms that the coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven in power and great glory with the angels, with a shout, with the trumpet, to gather together the elect, was in AD 70. So, whereas the apostles asked about his parousia, and oh, by the way, Mr. Gentry has, at least in the past, admitted that Matthew 24, verse 27, which is about his parousia, was in AD 70. So the apostles asked about the parousia. The apostles were told the parousia would be in AD 70. Where's the distinction? But the main point is, the apostles asked about the coming of the Lord. Matthew 24, 3. Mr. Gentry admits, teaches, and affirms that Jesus' coming was in AD 70. Where's the distinction? There is none. Oh. The apostles asked about the end of the age, right? Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Well, it just so happens that in his formal written debate with Thomas Ice, Kenneth Gentry, that book was published in 1999 by Craigle, by the way, on page 63, Mr. Gentry wrote this, obviously not arguing with the preterist. Quote, the change of the age. Okay, what were the apostles asking about? The end of the age. What is Mr. Gentry saying? The end of the age. Okay, once again, quote, the change of the age is finalized and sealed at the destruction of, Jerusalem. Wait a minute. Now, Mr. Gentry tells us the apostles were not asking about the end of the age associated with any destruction of Jerusalem. They were only asking about the end of the age associated with the destruction of the temple. And yet in his debate with Thomas Ice, he said the change of the age was finalized at the destruction of Jerusalem. And you know, in this quote, he doesn't even mention the temple. So, the apostles asked about the end of the age in response to Jesus' prediction of the destruction of the temple. Mr. Gentry says the change of the age is finalized and sealed. That means the end of the age came at the destruction of Jerusalem, and he doesn't even mention the temple. Do you see the confusion here? Are you confused yet? Is this confusing? Yes. But it's not because the truth is confused. It is because Mr. Gentry, when not arguing against preterists, argues one thing. When he was arguing with and attacking and condemning preterists, he completely does a 180 and refutes his own arguments that he had used against the dispensationalists. Matthew chapter 24, end of the age, coming of the Lord, supposedly the end of human history. Oh, but wait, no. The end of the age was in AD 70, at the destruction of Jerusalem, at the coming of the Lord, in power and great glory. So, Mr. Gentry dichotomizes a text that simply cannot be divided. His attempts to divide Matthew 24 and 25 are specious and they are untenable. That means they can't be defended. So it really doesn't matter what Mr. Gentry will write in his upcoming book on the ostensible confusion of the apostles. From his own keyboard, he has refuted his own claims. He says the apostles were not concerned with the fall of the city, just the temple. And again, I'll have a whole lot more to say about that next week. He says that the apostles were concerned about the coming of the Lord and the end of the age. And then he turns around and tells us the Lord came and the end of the age came in AD 70. Oh, but wait. That's not the end of the age that the apostles were concerned about when he predicted the destruction of the temple, even though they asked about the end of the age and his coming when he predicted the destruction of the temple. You see the problem? Confusion reigns in Mr. Gentry's writings. Hey, listen, do not forget. Please, go to my website, go to the store, look up the book, Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? Order a copy of the book. Again, as long as I'm doing these reviews, the price will remain at $15.95. When I'm done reviewing and producing the videos, when these are over, the price will resort to the higher price. I'm really giving you a good price on the book as long as I'm doing these reviews. So please do yourself a favor. Again, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Order the book, Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? Okay, I'm going to leave it at that point in this video, and I've only got 3 or 4, maybe five more videos that I'm going to do in response to Mr. Gentry's attack on my book. So, you have a fantastic weekend. Please be safe. Lord willing, I'll see you on Monday.